I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Adam Miller, the co-founder of MIDAO. Adam, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Excited to dive into the world of DAOs in Web3. I personally need to know a lot more about DAOs because I truly believe it is the future of internet organizations, but I feel like there's a lot to be done to convert all of the steps and the procedures that are involved with the organizations today into the Web3 version and make it more decentralized, transparent, and all those good things. And I know that you know a lot about this, so I'm excited to get your insights into where DAOs are at right now, how MIDAO is helping create DAOs, and everything to do with DAOs. So let's just start from the top with a little bit on what have you and your team done with MIDAO, how does it relate to DAOs, and then we'll dive into all things of decentralized organizations.
Yeah, sounds great. First of all, I believe DAOs are the future of all organizations, not just what we might consider internet organizations. That said, what MIDAO does, MIDAO, our company, is we help DAOs incorporate. And so just like any traditional startup company, most everyone knows that one of the first things you do when you start a company is you go form your corporation or your LLC. And we don't even really think about why. It's just a given. But for the same reasons that almost everyone starting a regular business has to incorporate, most DAOs should too.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because I feel like from the beginning of what DAOs were, just sort of a bunch of cypherpunks or just tech guys saying, hey, let's just make this a very decentralized group where we can vote on things and sort of make a company. Obviously, the next logical step would be to make that a legitimate company. And I feel like the regulation of creating companies, corporations, or LLCs, maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, but I feel like they'll probably need to catch up to as DAOs start incorporating. Maybe there's some slight differences between traditional corporations and creating a DAO on the regulation side. But let's just dive into, in terms of MIDAO, creating a legit corporation or LLC for a DAO. Why exactly do DAOs need to do that, and why should they?
Yeah, so the biggest reason is that, taking a step back, all the governments of the world, right, that govern every spot of land on Earth, and therefore we fall under their jurisdiction as people, whether we like it or not. Virtually every tax institution in the world, when it looks at a group of people engaging in a common enterprise, collaborating, and there's money flowing to the tax institutions like the IRS, that looks like a general partnership. And what that means is a couple things, most importantly. One is that all of the people participating in that general partnership are jointly and severally liable for the actions of the other people and that organization. So if you're part of an unincorporated DAO and there's some kind of fraud that goes down or someone sues the DAO for whatever reason, you as an individual member can be held liable for the entire DAO's liability if you have the money to front it. And so like a friend of mine in crypto likes to say, like, do you have a house? And if so, do you want to keep that house? If so, don't join a DAO that's not incorporated. So legal liability is a big one, but also tax liability. So again, those tax institutions like the IRS, if they see a group of 100 people working together and that group makes, let's say, $1 million worth of profit, even if it stays in the DAO and doesn't get distributed to the members, the IRS will say, okay, each of you 100 people is responsible for taxes on 1/100th of that DAO's $1 million worth of earnings. So each of you has to pay taxes on $10,000 worth of earnings, even if you didn't see a penny of it. So those are the two biggest reasons. The fact is that the legal system we live in today will treat you a certain way unless you do incorporate and thus choose how you'd like to be treated in a more favorable manner by governments.
No, that makes total sense, and I did take Business 101 and understanding the difference between a general partnership and a corporation, and that you really need to focus on your personal liability and limiting that, and that makes total sense in a DAO as well. And I feel like as DAOs get more popular, people will realize that's the logical conclusion, is they need to be incorporated. So how exactly does MIDAO incorporate? Is there a specific location or methods that DAOs should incorporate in to optimize their operations?
So there are a lot of questions that go into figuring out whether and where and what type of entity to use to incorporate a DAO. We have a guide on our website, MIDAO.org, that goes through, picking your jurisdiction and picking your entity type and figuring out who's going to actually create this entity for you. But long story short, what our specialty is at MIDAO is we are working with the government of the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific to create the best legal and regulatory framework in the world for DAOs and later for digital assets. And that started with the passing of a couple of laws over the past couple of years that created a DAO LLC, both a for-profit and a non-profit version. It's modeled off of the work that was done in Wyoming, but with some market improvements. And we really do think it's the best legal entity in the world for DAOs, but that doesn't mean it's a good fit for every DAO. So we always recommend people, I know you hear it a lot in crypto, but this is not legal advice. I'm not even a lawyer. You should talk to a lawyer, especially the more that's at stake, the more you should hire a lawyer, and you should definitely be incorporated. So our specialty is helping you evaluate the Marshall Islands DAO LLC and figure out if that's a good fit for your DAO. And if so, we can create and maintain that entity for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great to know. And I'm guessing that you've spoken to a lot of different DAOs throughout this process and probably focusing on slightly different industries as well. From what I understand, the crypto bros that sort of started from the incubation of DAOs, they're more Web3 focused and just focused on finance or cryptocurrency. Can you talk about the types of companies that you're already working with and have worked with to create DAOs, and is it branching out beyond finance and beyond Web3?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think that's a strong trend that I see is people starting DAOs to do things in the meat space, the real world, whatever you want to call it, that may not even be directly related to building Web3 open source software. Which usually does something related to finance, whether it's NFTs or DeFi or whatever. So while we do have our fair share of protocols and related technology projects, we also have people trying to save the rainforest and running meetup groups and investing in ancient artifacts, kind of like Constitution DAO was going to do with the Constitution. So all kinds of things that are not really like Web3 native. They're definitely not like crypto bros. They're just regular people who are planning on starting a project, and they've heard that there's this new way of doing something, of doing projects, of organizing people and resources called a DAO. And they're thinking to themselves, well, maybe we should do this as a DAO instead of doing it as a traditional charity or for-profit company or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen a lot of corporations that they hear about this new format of DAOs and they're interested and they're like, hey, we should just switch the company to a DAO. But I feel like they should really analyze that, like the cost benefit analysis, and like, is it really better for companies that are, to become a DAO LLC versus just a regular corporation that's for profit and, traditional method? Are there actually a lot of tangible benefits to going through this process that's still sort of gray area in certain regulation jurisdictions and things like that?
I would say that the future state of any organization depends a lot on the structure that's put in place early on in the project. And so if you look at a traditional corporation that's already operating and already has a fair amount of capital and revenue and expenses, I don't think it's likely we'll see companies like that actually convert into a DAO per se, because they already have an existing set of interests and incentives that are aligned a certain way, and it's going to be hard to convince those people to, for example, give up their power or give up their ownership share or share of profit or whatever it is. I think what's more common is either starting a DAO from the beginning or starting a DAO to complement their existing company. And so I think that's what we'll see this year in 2023 with a lot of big Fortune 500 companies and lots of other companies is you'll have the company you've already been operating for a while, and you'll also start a DAO, and there will be some official relationship between the two, maybe some licensing of branding, maybe some funding that flows between the two. And then the DAO might be given even governance rights over a certain software, like is common in crypto, but maybe even for a technology company that isn't even doing things on Web3, but wanted to leverage a DAO to give a community, even if it's indirect, power over some piece of open source software.
Yeah, that's a great point, Adam. And I feel like with these large companies, especially these companies that have a lot of capital, they make a venture arm and they make a research arm. Why not make a DAO arm to get more of the community and their customers, their users involved to be able to have a say in that part of the company?
Yeah, yeah. And it's actually, even in the like TradFi Web 2 world, it's pretty common for companies to have multiple entities involved in a project, right? Now, we don't want to have like 140 entities, then we start to look like FTX, which I think had 135 all over the world. But I know some very successful 100-year-old American companies that have like 15 entities, right, or 20 entities. And so people in crypto shouldn't shy away from creative legal structuring. That's something that people have done in the old world for some time. We need to do it too. And so that can mean combining a for-profit, a nonprofit, in multiple entities spread out around the world.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I mentioned a few times about the crypto bros sort of came up with this genius idea, and now it's spreading out to major corporations. And as you said at the beginning, you think not even just internet organizations, but all organizations could benefit from this. But I feel like we're still in the 0.1%. It's pretty early on. What do you see as the balance between traditional companies that are already well established reaching out to you and having discussions about should we have a DAO versus sort of this groups of Web3 people that are just advocates of the technology, they want to showcase the benefits? Where do you see that balance?
Well, I think really the benefit of what we're building in the DAO space, well, for a couple of comments. First of all, what we're building is technology that allows you to do membership tracking, governance, and treasury management on chain. That's what we're building in the DAO space. That doesn't mean you have to take that technology and then also have and use it in a fully democratic, non-hierarchical, less structured, less top-down type of organization day to day. You can use it. You can take that technology and apply it to even traditional corporations that have shareholders and boards and CEOs. Maybe just instead of doing voting on paper, ballots, you do voting using a wallet on the blockchain. And instead of counting votes in a board meeting by raising your hand and someone counting, maybe you go in and you actually sign your wallet. So I think this technology can be used in organizations that look a lot like traditional organizations, that a lot of like Web3 native people won't even say that that's a DAO, right? But to me, it doesn't matter what we call it, that effectively starts to look like a DAO. And then on the other end of the spectrum is most of the DAOs today are like, again, highly democratic. But I think most of the organizations of the future will be somewhere in between those two poles, right? They're not going to be every decision is democratic and minimize structure, minimize policy, minimize top down. And it's not going to be like traditional corporations. It's going to be somewhere in between. I think what we'll do is we'll find a way to give ultimate power to the people through these DAO structures, right? Whether that means one person, one vote, or one token, one vote, or quadratic voting, or whatever. But that doesn't mean that group of people might not hire a CEO or a board. And maybe it's a liquid hire to the extent that like you're staking on a person, and whatever person has the most staked is the CEO. And then as soon as someone else has more stakes, that person's gone. So like you could, unlike a traditional corporation, you could run it like a corporation, but in a way that the community can oust the CEO at any time, or maybe shut down the budget, right? And that still gives a lot more power to the people, as I think is what people like to think we're doing with DAOs, than just a traditional model alone.
Yeah, I feel like when people think of the DAOs and it's like a one vote, one person, one vote, or one coin, one vote, and say there's a million coins and there's a million people and nobody really has hierarchy over the other. It's just chaos. No one can agree. How can a DAO have a common purpose if all a million people have different ideas on where we want to spend the money? And I feel like, yeah, some balance between having chaos of everybody fully democratic and having a little bit of hierarchy with these companies, especially some of these layer one protocols I'm seeing, they sort of start more centralized and they build a common vision, and then they start releasing parts of the democratic process to the community. And like, okay, we built the foundation. People that agree with this already can continue on with this direction, and it doesn't have to be exactly what the founding team wanted, but at least we have an idea of like where we want to go together.
Yeah, I think that's a great model to follow, especially if you're building a product. I do also think there's another prototypical type of DAO, which is the community DAO, where it's just inherent in the philosophy of the organization that you're going to be democratic from the beginning, and that wherever people decide to go is fine. And often with these community DAOs, take something like Nouns, right? Nouns was like a combination of an NFT project with a governance structure that had absolutely no purpose out of the gate except to experiment for fun, see what happens, right? Over time, now they have like tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, and they're building a lot more structure, I'd imagine, into what they're doing. Either approach is fine. I think, when a DAO is thinking about whether to be more democratic or more centralized, or it's not all even on one scale, right? There's different dimensions to it. But I think a useful metaphor or analogy is to think about governments, right? And like, which is better, America or China? Right, in terms of like its governance. And a lot of people would say, oh my God, our democracy is so challenging, it's so difficult, we're all over the place, we can't stay aligned, and China's going to beat us and all this stuff. And that's possible, and certainly China's better at some stuff than America. But if you ask a person, like, where would you want to live? Just based on governance structure, I still think most people in the world would choose democracy if they really know what the options are. And so similarly, I think given choice, when consumers, employees, contributors, even investors, when people have a choice between companies where one is like the old model, like dictatorship, and the other is like highly democratic and decentralized, I think people are going to choose the democratic one. And that company might even end up being worse in other ways, but I still think it's the one that people are going to choose.
Yeah, I would love to see the election process and in voting moving into Web3, and maybe the growth of DAOs and internet organizations into DAOs will help realize that paper voting has a lot of flaws in it, and like blockchain is a great use case for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. What we're building with DAOs today, those core competencies are going to be used in so many situations. I mean, it's kind of like even just somewhere in between a multi-sig and a DAO, there's a bunch of use cases too, where, multi-sig, for those who don't know, basically means like 3 or 5 people or a small number of people controlling a treasury together, and it's usually a majority vote or something like it. That's basically a mini DAO. Right. But often you don't think of yourself as an organization at that stage. Maybe it's a vacation trip that a bunch of friends are going on together, or a group of people that wants to buy an NFT or invest in crypto together, or buy, whatever that group is. It could be a high school chess club. It could be college clubs and sports teams, right? All these types of like groups where people, homeowners associations and related, right? Parks. All these things that are like in between just a few people that already trust each other and can work together in today's world, and then a massive, organization, or all these other types of organizations that today we don't really consider them organizations. They're just like a club. But in the future, these clubs are going to have a shared treasury membership tracking and governance on the blockchain for sure. And whether we call that a DAO or not will be up to us.
Very cool. And from what I understand with MIDAO, you're not limiting DAOs that come to you and say, hey, we want to create a DAO that's legit and under, incorporated under certain regulations. Their level of how democratic they want to be versus their hierarchy, they get to choose all of that themselves, and your team actually isn't involved with any of that.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I can share my perspective from having spoken with so many DAOs over the past couple of years, but it's really not our responsibility to figure out the governance approach that a DAO actually takes, or the technology even to implement it. Our job is really just to help you incorporate your DAO in the Marshall Islands, if that turns out to be a good fit for your DAO. We do have a partner network of lawyers and tax advisors and governance consultants and others, and even tech firms that we can connect people with, and that whether they're a client of ours or not, we're happy to do that. So, always happy to help point people in the right direction when it comes to, those types of matters.
That's good to know, Adam. And you mentioned earlier in the beginning of the interview about some predictions for 2023 and the next stages for DAOs moving into sort of mainstream adoption. Can you give your insights into this year and then the coming years? What will be the next big step for DAOs that people sort of take them seriously as they would a regular corporation?
Yeah, so I'll give you an argument why 2023 is going to be the year of the DAO. or at least the year of the DAO, and maybe other things too. There was a study middle of last year by someone in the DAO space that was not a perfect statistical analysis, but it wasn't bad, and it showed that about 5% of Americans had heard of of a DAO like 6 months ago. And there's this, I forget what the number is called in like societies and large groups of humans, but usually when something gets around like 12, 13% is when you go from like something that it feels like no one's ever heard of and it's like this fringe thing to suddenly being kind of mainstream, right? Like nothing ever goes 100% or even 50%. But when you get up to a certain point, everyone starts to hear about it and talk about it and think about it and consider it as an option. And I think that's what's going to happen this year as we go from like under that like minimum threshold to a point where kind of like NFTs, like everyone's kind of heard of it. And I think that is going to 10x or 100x the number of DAOs that are out there when 10x or 100x people have actually heard of them and realize that it's an option for their next project. Yeah,
it's very exciting. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people have NFTs, they've heard of them, but there's many use cases and they probably think, oh, that's, a digital picture. But actually it's much more than that. And I feel like DAOs will be the same. They'll say, oh, it's just a democratic voting process. But it's actually not. It's actually just a company, just like a corporation.
Yeah, and DAOs can be all kinds of different things, right? A DAO can just be a community. It can be a company. It can be an association. Like there's all these words that people use. Again, it can be a family, a friend group. These words often don't have technical meaning, just like DAO. But I think we will see DAOs used in all kinds of different circumstances, even aside from what we would think of as business.
Very cool, Adam. And what's the best way for people to learn more about starting a DAO and to reach out to MIDAO to get assistance with that as well?
For sure. Go to MIDAO.org. It's MIDAO.org. In the upper right, you can click to read our guide, which is that guide to DAO incorporation, or browse around our website. If you want, you can find us on Twitter at MIDAODS. That's MIDAODS, or I'm at 0xThriller. Or if you're into Web3 social and you're on Farcaster already, I'm the Thriller.
Wow. Very cool, Adam. I will leave the links for MIDAO and your socials as well in the description box below. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and give me and all the viewers insights into the future of DAOs. We'll see if those predictions come true, and I think that I as well think it's going to be a big year for DAOs in 2023 here, and hopefully for Bitcoin and all of Web3 as well. It's very exciting. Thank you so much for your time, and let's follow up in the near future.
All right. Thanks, Ashton.